The summer of 1997 in Harrows Creek, Arkansas, was a suffocating blanket of heat, humidity, and an unspoken tension. The sky itself seemed to press down, heavy with foreboding. Even the birds flying low as if weighed down by the air. This town, nestled between ancient woods and forgotten paths, was about to be struck by a storm unlike any it had ever known. It rolled in on July 3rd, the day before the 4th of July, and changed everything. That morning began with a deceptive calm. The Miller family farmhouse, a sentinel amidst the fields, stood quietly, its wood-framed windows open, inviting a faint breeze that stirred white curtains within. Inside, 11-year-old triplets, Sarah, Emily, and Hannah, giggled over their cereal, their bare feet drumming a playful rhythm against the worn hardwood floor. Their older brother, Michael, who had just celebrated his 16th birthday, was already outside, lending a hand to their father, Thomas. In the barn, not a soul among them could have known that this seemingly ordinary morning would be the last shred of normalcy their family would ever experience. By late afternoon, dark, bruised clouds began to gather over the ridge, swiftly blotting out the sun. The local radio crackled with a tornado watch, which was soon escalated to a full-blown warning. Residents of Harrows Creek were accustomed to the volatile July weather, but this storm felt different. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, the clouds hung unnaturally low, and thunder rumbled in long, distant growls that vibrated in the very bones of the earth. Eleanor Miller, the girl's mother, called them inside, her voice tight with a rising anxiety. Michael, with a teenager's efficiency, helped his father secure the storm shutters, then dashed inside as the wind gusts turned violent, tearing at the trees. By 5:47 p.m., the power had flickered and died, plunging the farmhouse into an unsettling darkness. The family huddled together in the cellar, a ritual performed many times during past storms. But this time, it wasn't enough. The tornado that ripped through Harrows Creek was later classified as an EF4, its winds exceeding 170 miles per hour. Trees snapped like fragile twigs, roofs were peeled from homes like paper, and the Miller farmhouse shuddered violently as the storm's monstrous breath passed over it. The ground trembled, a deep, guttural roar of wind mingled with frantic screams, and then, in a single, deafening moment, silence. When Michael finally stirred, he was buried beneath a chaotic tangle of wood and soil. His forehead throbbed, a warm stream of blood trickling down his temple, and his ears rang with a persistent, high-pitched whine. He clawed his way out of the cellar's wreckage, his limbs heavy with shock, to find his father, Thomas, unconscious but mercifully alive. His mother, Eleanor, was bruised and weeping, her cries echoing the desolation. But the triplets, Sarah, Emily, and Hannah, they were gone. There was no sign of them, no blood, no bodies, not even a single footprint. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and heartbreak. Neighbors, their own homes scarred, rallied around the Millers. Rescue crews poured in from the county, their grim faces reflecting the magnitude of the disaster. Helicopters hovered like predatory birds above the torn countryside, their rotors a constant, thrumming reminder of the tragedy. Search dogs, their keen noses pressed to the devastated earth, were led through the debris. Volunteers combed every inch of the fields and woods. For miles, their eyes strained, their hope waning. With each passing hour, the farmhouse, or what little remained of it, became a grim headquarters, a place where hope and heartbreak intertwined. But there was nothing, not a ribbon, not a tiny shoe, not even a scrap of clothing. Authorities, desperate for an explanation, theorized that the storm might have carried the girls away, perhaps into the river, which had swollen violently during the torrential rain. But the Miller family, clinging to a desperate thread of denial, refused to accept it. Their bodies would have surfaced, Eleanor whispered, her voice raw. Something would have turned up, but nothing ever did. The story made the local news. Briefly, a few reporters from Little Rock descended upon Harrows Creek, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust into the faces of grieving locals. Tragedy in Harrows Creek screamed the headlines for a few days, before the relentless churn of the news cycle moved on. But the Millers never did. Michael, once a quiet, playful teen, became a ghost in his own home. He retreated into himself, a fortress of silence built around his grief. His parents, now broken under the crushing weight of unanswered questions, tried to hold on, but the echoing absence of their daughters hollowed their home from the inside out. Time, that relentless thief, passed. School years faded into a painful silence. Christmases came and went, their empty stockings a cruel mockery of joy. Michael graduated, then left town, unable to bear the oppressive quiet anymore. The land, a painful reminder, was sold to cover mounting medical bills and the elusive promise of new beginnings. The farmhouse, a skeletal remains of a once vibrant home, was boarded up, its windows staring blankly at the scarred landscape. For most, the Triplet sisters became a tragic ghost story, a hushed whisper among newcomers at the gas station, a sorrowful tale recounted by the elderly during summer thunderstorms. But Michael never let it go. By 2017, Michael was 36 years old. He had moved 2 hours east, working odd jobs, avoiding attachments, his life a testament to his unresolved grief. His parents had passed years ago, his mother from cancer, his father from a sudden heart attack 5 years later. The grief for his sisters, however, remained a raw, festering wound. There were no funerals for the triplets, just a shared gravestone in the Harrows Creek Cemetery with their names etched into the cold stone and the poignant words, "Taken too soon, but not forgotten." Michael visited the grave once a year, always leaving 3 fresh lilies, a silent tribute to the lives cut tragically short. But something deep within him, a stubborn refusal to accept closure, persisted. He felt, with an inexplicable certainty, that the girls hadn't died that night. Not all of them, at least. He didn't know why this conviction held him in its grip, only that the absence of concrete evidence had left a door cracked open in his soul, a door he couldn't close, no matter how many years bled into each other. In March 2020, after years of restless nightmares, Michael returned to Harrows Creek. He told no one. The town had changed. New houses stood where wildwoods had once grown. The winding road that led to the old farmhouse was barely recognizable, a forgotten ribbon of asphalt choked by weeds, rusted fences, and reclaiming trees. He had come to say goodbye, finally, to lay the ghosts to rest. But what he found there changed everything. Michael parked his truck just before the property line, the driveway that had once welcomed. His family home was almost invisible beneath layers of tenacious overgrowth. Thorns and branches scraped the sides of his vehicle as he drove slowly, his heart thudding with each forward foot. The house, or what remained of it, stood like a forgotten skeleton of the past. The roof had collapsed in on itself years ago. One wall had crumbled completely, exposing what used to be the living room. Vines, thick and gnarled, snaked across the floorboards and into the broken hearth. Michael stood at the edge of the ruins, hands shoved deep in his pockets, the wind tugging gently at his coat. The place felt more like a tomb than a memory. But he hadn't come to grieve. He came because he needed to look one last time. He spent hours walking the land. The barn was mostly gone, its timbers scattered like forgotten bones. The cellar had caved in, the wooden door now a jagged hole leading into an abyss of blackness. The storm had erased so much, but something still whispered through the decay. Faint outlines of where the girls used to play, the ancient tree they had carved their initials into, the precise spot where they had buried their time capsule the year before the storm. Michael stopped near the back edge of the property, where the fields once met the tree line. He hadn't been this far back in decades. Something pulled him here, like an invisible thread buried deep beneath his ribs. The ground was uneven and soft from recent rains. Trees creaked overhead, a mournful lament, and birds scattered as he stepped through the underbrush. Then he saw it, something pale, poking out from the dirt near an old fence post. It was small, rounded, and half covered in soil. At first, he thought it might be a rock, but as he knelt down and brushed away the clinging dirt, the shape became unmistakable. It was a shoe, a child's shoe, caked in mud, brittle from age, but still intact. Pale blue canvas with a frayed strap and a faded daisy on the side. His breath caught in his throat. He remembered it instantly. It belonged to Hannah. The shoe didn't make sense. The area had been searched, combed again and again for weeks after the storm. No one had found a trace, yet here it was, not even fully buried. It looked like it had surfaced recently, as if someone had moved it. Michael sat in the dirt for a long time, holding the shoe in his lap, his heart hammering against his ribs. The wind picked up again, colder now, heavier, with something unspeakable. He returned the next day with tools, a grim determination hardening his features. If something else was buried out there, he was going to find it. He dug carefully, methodically, starting where he had found the shoe. It didn't take long. A few feet down, the earth changed color. The soil was looser, clearly disturbed. Michael slowed his movements, his hands shaking with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Sweat rolled down his back despite the cool air. He hit something hard. Not a rock, wood, a box. Small, flat, with rusted hinges and a metal latch. It took effort to pull it out without breaking it apart completely. The box was no larger than a show box. The latch crumbled easily under his grip. Inside, wrapped in a faded piece of pink cloth, was a collection of items. He unfolded it slowly. There was a locket, a tiny notebook, a friendship bracelet made of colored thread, and a Polaroid photo. The photo was faded, but clear enough to make out the faces, Sarah, Emily, and Hannah, standing in front of the tree line, their young faces beaming. Behind them stood someone else, a man. His face was half in shadow, turned just slightly away. Michael stared at the photo in disbelief. He knew the picture. It had been taken on the morning of the storm, but this version had never existed in the family albums. The man in the photo wasn't their father. He wasn't anyone Michael recognized. Panic surged in his chest. He looked at the back of the photo. Scribbled in faint pencil were the words, "Last game before we go," he promised. Michael's hands trembled as he stared at the note, his mind swirling with impossible questions. Who was the man? What did he promise? Why had this box been buried behind the old fence, far from the house, and why had it resurfaced now? He reported the discovery to the sheriff's office the next morning. Harrow's Creek didn't have much of a department, just a few officers and a part-time detective. They took the items, filed a report, and promised to reopen the case. But Michael saw the doubt in their eyes. Cold cases this old rarely ended in answers. Most people assumed nature had swallowed the girls. But now, there was proof. Someone else had been involved. The case caught attention fast. When the sheriff's office submitted the locket and bracelet for testing, DNA confirmed the items had indeed belonged to the Miller sisters. The notebook, filled with short scribbles and childlike drawings, matched Emily's handwriting. But none of the items explained where they'd gone or how the box ended up buried decades later. Then, something even more bizarre happened. A week after the news broke, an elderly farmer named Walter Peterson came forward. He lived on the next property over, about a mile of woods separating his land from what used to be the Millers. He'd worked that land since the 1960s, knew every inch of it, but he'd never spoken about what he'd seen that night. Not until now. He told the sheriff about a truck, an old green pickup, that had been parked at the edge of the Miller property the night of the storm. He remembered it because it didn't belong to anyone local. He remembered it because in the chaos of that evening, with trees swaying and thunder shaking the sky, he'd seen 3 small figures being led into the truck by a man. He thought at the time it was just the family evacuating. But when he learned the girls had vanished and were never found, he kept quiet, convinced his eyes had played tricks on him. Michael sat in the station, listening to the recording of Walter's statement, his fists clenched, knuckles white. The man had seen them. Sarah, Emily, and Hannah had been alive after the storm, and some man had taken them. That meant they hadn't just been lost. They'd been taken, hidden, or worse. Michael couldn't sleep that night. He drove back to the property and sat in the field where the shoe was found, flashlight in hand. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. The wind howled again, like it did that night. The air felt thick, heavy with ghosts. Just before midnight, the beam of his flashlight caught something among the brush, a small wooden stake. He walked toward it, his heart thudding in his throat. It was old, weather-worn, but still upright. A second stake stood 10 feet beyond it, then another, A pattern emerged, a path. He followed them into the woods, each step louder in his ears than the last. The stakes led him deeper than he remembered ever going, past fallen trees and crumbling stone markers. Finally, the path ended at a clearing, a circular patch of earth surrounded by tall pines. In the center stood a small concrete slab, half buried. Under vines, Michael knelt, pulling them back. A metal hatch lay beneath the dirt. His breath stopped. The hatch had no markings, no handle, just a narrow seam around its edge. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years, maybe decades. But someone had built it, hidden it, and whatever lay beneath might hold the answers he had been chasing for 20 years. Michael returned the next morning with tools, a crowbar, gloves, a flashlight, and a growing dread in his chest. The hatch felt older than anything else on the property, yet it didn't belong to the house, nor was it marked on any of the original land surveys he found online. It was like someone had intentionally hidden it where no one would think to look. He worked carefully, wedging the crowbar into the seam, prying and pulling. The rusted metal groaned in protest before finally giving way. A gust of cold air rushed. Up from below, damp and stale, a metal ladder descended into darkness. He stared down into the opening, his flashlight beam shaking slightly in his hand. The space below was narrow and silent. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he took a breath and climbed down. The room was small, no larger than a storage cellar. Concrete walls, a dirt floor, and one long wooden bench along the far side. The air was thick with dust and mildew. In the corner sat a rusted metal cabinet, partially open. On the floor, scattered and faded, were toys, a stuffed rabbit, a plastic hairbrush, a puzzle missing pieces, the kind of toys an 8 or 9-year-old might have once loved. Michael moved slowly, scanning the room, his eyes landing on a torn notebook near the cabinet. He picked it up gently. The first few pages were illegible, damaged by time and moisture. But halfway through, scrawled in childlike handwriting, was a date, August 14, 1998. Over a year after the storm. The entry read, "Sarah's tooth came out today. Em cried because she thinks we'll never go home. He said we're not ready yet. He keeps the door locked most of the day now. It's cold at night." Michael's knees gave out. He sat on the floor, his hands shaking, his eyes wide with horror. The girls, they had been alive, locked in this space. For how long? How many days? Months? Years? The pages that followed were increasingly erratic. Notes about food being brought once a day. The girls keeping track of time, with scratches on the wall. One entry mentioned someone named Mystery, another mentioned a song he would hum before entering the room. But the entry stopped abruptly in 1999. No explanation. Just a final page with a drawing, 3 small girls holding hands, standing under a cloud with rain falling down. Underneath, written in shaky letters, were the words, "We're still here." Michael emerged from the underground room, pale and stunned. He called the sheriff immediately. Forensics came within hours. The space was photographed, cataloged, and sealed off. Tests would take weeks, maybe months, but everyone already knew. The sisters had been taken, hidden less than a mile from there, home, and kept alive, at least for a while. The question that followed was the hardest one. Why? That same week, the sheriff's department pulled archived missing person reports and cold case files. They started looking into anyone in the area in 1997 who had a record or who fit the profile. The name that surfaced wasn't someone Michael recognized, Arthur Davies. He had lived less than 6 miles from the Miller farm during the 1990s. He had no immediate criminal record then, but neighbors remembered him as strange, quiet, always watching, never talking. He moved away in 2001, arrested in Oklahoma in 2003 for unrelated charges, but released a few years later. No one had heard from him since. Michael's stomach churned at the idea that this man might have been right under their noses the entire time. He went to the town library to dig through old microfilms, scanned any photo, any article that mentioned the name. That's when he found it, an old newspaper clipping from 1996, a photo of a 4th of July church picnic, children on a swing set, parents barbecuing in the background. Almost blurred, stood a man near the trees watching. The grainy black and white image didn't offer much, but Michael knew what he was looking at. It was the same man from the photo in the buried box, Arthur. Davies had been there the day before the storm. He had been close, watching, waiting. A warrant was issued within days, but Davies had vanished. The address tied to his parole records in Oklahoma was empty. His name had been changed in 2011. His digital footprint scrubbed clean. Authorities suspected he had either died in anonymity or was living off-grid somewhere far from Arkansas. The community of Harrow's Creek was stunned. For years, they had mourned the triplets as victims of nature, swept away in a cruel tragedy. But now, the truth was unraveling like an old, threadbare sweater, revealing something far darker, far more human. Michael became a recluse after that. The press reached out, but he refused all interviews. What could he say? That he'd walked that land 100 times and never thought to look past the trees? That he had blamed the wind, the rain, the heavens, when all along it had been something far more human? He kept the notebook, the original. The state had wanted to preserve it as evidence, but Michael fought to keep it. For him, it wasn't evidence, it was a voice, proof that they had endured, survived, tried to send a message. And then one day, he got a call that changed everything again. The sheriff's office had received an anonymous letter. It was postmarked from Montana. Inside was a single Polaroid, just like the one from the box, but newer, dated July 3rd, 2017, exactly 20 years since the storm. It showed a woman standing outside what looked like an isolated cabin, her face partially turned, hair pulled into a braid. On the back of the photo was a single sentence, "She still hums the song." They ran the photo through facial recognition databases. It didn't match anyone in state or federal records, but Michael knew. He didn't need software to confirm what his heart already screamed. It was Hannah. Michael stared at the photograph. Long after the call had ended, he turned it over again and again, tracing the edges of the image as if the truth might bleed out from its corners. Hannah. It had to be her. The braid, the distinctive shape of her eyes, even the faint scar near her temple from a fall off her bike when they were 6. It was all there, and yet it didn't make sense. Why now? Why anonymously? And what did the message mean? She still hums the song, the same song mentioned in the journal entries, the one mystery used to hum before opening the door. It haunted Michael more than any face or photograph. That melody, meaningless to the world, was burned into the memory of 3 girls for decades. Was she still trapped? Was she still under someone's control? Or was the message a signal? Something only a sibling would understand. Law enforcement traced the photo's postmark to a small, rural town in Montana's Flathead County, but no sender. Information, just the stamp and a smudge of ink. Michael offered to fly there himself. The sheriff discouraged it, but didn't stop him. Within a week, Michael was on a flight, the photograph packed carefully between the pages of his notebook. He hadn't told anyone, not even his closest friend from work. Some part of him didn't believe he'd return. Or maybe it was that he couldn't face another dead end with an audience. Montana greeted him with snow and silence. Small towns dotted the landscape like forgotten time capsules. He rented a car and drove the highway north, his eyes scanning each rise and bend in the land for something familiar, even though he'd never been here before. The photo had no coordinates, no clear landmarks, just a cabin, a woman, and a blurry stretch of woods in the background. He stopped at gas stations, diners, old post offices, showing the photo around quietly. Most people shook their heads politely. Some didn't even look. It was in a worn-out bait shop on the edge of Glacier National Park that he caught his first break. An older woman behind the counter squinted at the photo, then tapped it lightly with one calloused finger. "That cabin looks like it might be up along El Calo Trail. Only a few places out that way. Some off-grid types. Folks keep to themselves." Michael asked how to get there. The woman hesitated before scribbling a rough map on a torn napkin. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, then turned back to stacking fishing lures. The drive was rough. Dirt roads narrowed into gravel, gravel into mud. Trees arched overhead like cathedral ceilings, heavy with snow and silence. After nearly an hour of slow climbing through the hills, he saw it, the cabin. It looked just like the one in the photo, tilted roof, Small window to the right. Chimney stacked with mismatched stone. No smoke rose from it now, no sign of life. He parked 100 yards back and approached on foot, boots crunching softly over frozen ground. When he reached the porch, he stood still for a long time. No movement inside, no sound. He knocked. Once, silence. He knocked again, louder, a flicker behind the curtain. His breath caught in his throat. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for an eye to appear behind it. A single eye, narrowed, cautious blue. Michael stepped forward and whispered the names: Sarah, Emily, Hannah. The eye blinked. The door slammed shut. He waited for 5 minutes, then 10. He knocked again, softly. No answer came. Eventually, he left a small note, tucked into the door frame, folded tightly round the photograph. He wrote only one sentence: "I never stopped looking," and then he walked away. He drove back to town and waited for 3 days. He stayed in a cheap motel near the highway, leaving his phone on the nightstand like a sacred object. He barely ate, barely slept. On the 4th morning, there was a knock at his motel door. When he opened it, there was no one outside, but on the ground, lying neatly in the center of the doormat, was the photo he had left at the cabin, and underneath it, a bracelet, braided threads of pink, yellow, and green, the same kind they used to make on the porch swing in the summer of '97. Michael knelt on the cold concrete, picking up the bracelet as if it were made of glass. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the world. It wasn't just similar. It was the exact same pattern Hannah had favored, the same 3 colors, the same uneven knot where she had once run out of pink thread. Time had frayed it, yes, but it was unmistakable. It was hers. He stared down the empty corridor of the motel's 2nd floor, hoping to see someone, anyone. But the lot below was quiet. Snowflakes floated gently through the morning light. Whoever had delivered the bracelet had come and gone without a sound. Michael sat back on his heels and looked at the photo again. Same cabin, same shadowed porch. His note was gone, replaced only by the bracelet. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a refusal. It was something else. Acknowledgement. That night, Michael couldn't stay in the motel. He needed to return, not to demand answers, not even to see her, but simply to leave something behind. A message, a sign that he was still here. He drove back to the cabin after dark, headlights off. Guided only by moonlight and memory, the trees stood like silent witnesses. When he reached the porch, he placed a sealed envelope beneath the woodpile. Near the door, inside was an old photograph of the 4 of them. Michael and the girls, taken the summer before the storm. He had kept it for decades, creased at the corners, carried through every move. On the back, he wrote, "You are not alone. If you want me to stop, I will. If you want me to stay, leave the porch light on tomorrow." It was all he could think to offer. The next night, he returned. The light was on, dim, flickering, but on. Michael didn't approach the door. He didn't need to. He simply sat in his car on the ridge above the property, watching from a distance, letting the knowledge settle into his chest like warmth after years of frost. Hannah, or someone, was still there, but the next morning, the light was off again. And when he returned to the bait shop to ask a quiet question or two, the old woman behind the counter told him something he didn't expect. "That cabin," she said, frowning, "it's been empty since the fire burned halfway down 10 years ago. Nobody's lived there since." Michael blinked. "No," he said carefully. "I was just there 2 nights ago." She gave him a strange look. Then, "I don't know what you saw, son, but that place has been dead quiet for a decade." He drove back immediately, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cabin was there, as it had always been, but something was different. The windows were boarded. The roof was partially collapsed on one side. The door hung ajar, rotted at the bottom. The chimney was blackened with soot that trailed up into a broken sky. Inside, the floor was warped and cold. Dust coated every surface. The furniture had been tossed, burned, shattered. There were no signs of life, no photo, no bracelet, no fire, no light, only ashes and silence. He dropped to his knees in the center of the ruined living room, his breath heaving in his chest. Was he losing his mind? Had he imagined the light, the bracelet, the photo, but then he noticed something on the floor, a symbol drawn in the soot, 3 small circles, side by side. It was the same doodle Hannah had drawn in her journals as a child. It was their symbol. The triplets. Them. Michael stepped back, overwhelmed. Someone had been here recently. Someone had drawn that, knowing he would understand. This wasn't just grief echoing in empty walls. It was real. Back in Arkansas, news of the cabin photo and the bracelet had reignited interest in the case. The FBI became involved. Behavioral analysts theorized that the girls, or at least one of them, had been taken across state lines, kept alive, possibly groomed into silence, hidden for years by a captor who never planned to let them go. If Hannah had escaped, she might have spent the rest of her life hiding, afraid to be found, afraid of what remembering would cost. But none of that brought him closer to the truth. The trail went cold again. Just as quickly as it had reopened, the leads evaporated. The cabin couldn't be tied definitively to anyone. No fingerprints, no DNA. The bracelet, even with its emotional weight, was circumstantial at best. And the note on the photo? It was handwritten, block letters, untraceable. Still, Michael held on to one belief with absolute certainty. Hannah had seen him, and she remembered. The months that followed were quiet, too quiet. Michael returned home to Arkansas. But he wasn't the same. Every shadow outside his apartment window, every knock at the door, every flicker of light in a hallway made his heart leap. He had seen something, felt something, but it wasn't the part that haunted him. It was the silence afterward, that unbearable silence. He tried to live normally again. He went back to work, made small talk, took out the trash, folded laundry, but in the quiet moments his mind slipped back into the woods, to the cabin, to the photograph, to the braid, to the bracelet in the snow. He couldn't stop seeing Hannah's eye behind that door, and he couldn't forget the message. She still hums the song. It was impossible to ignore the weight of that phrase. It echoed in his dreams, repeated itself during thunderstorms, whispered to him through the hum of the fridge or the radio static in his car. A song meant something. A song tied them to the man who took them. It was a clue, but he didn't know how to follow it. So he tried to remember everything, every detail about the summer of '97. What songs were playing on the radio? What jingles came from the television? What did his sisters use to sing while brushing their teeth, playing in the backyard, or riding their bikes? He pored over old home videos, straining for background melodies. But it was all just noise, until one evening, deep in a YouTube rabbit hole, he found it. A commercial from the early 1990s. A regional ad for a children's puppet show that toured county fairs in the South. The jingle was childish and overly sweet, but instantly familiar. He played it again, then again. He closed his eyes and could almost hear it beneath Hannah's voice in those journal entries. She had written down the phrase. He hums it before coming in. It was this song. He searched the show's name, Mr. Daniel's Happy Hour, and found that it had once traveled through Harrow's Creek in 1995. It was small-time entertainment, a one-man act with puppet characters and handmade backdrops. According to the archived county permit database, it was operated by someone named Daniel Arthur. Michael's heart stopped. Arthur, not Davies, Daniel. He double-checked the missing persons investigation. The man they had pursued had been listed as Arthur Davies, but a middle name wasn't documented. Michael called the FBI liaison, insisted. They re-examined the case under the assumption that Arthur and Daniel were the same person. Within days, everything shifted. A fingerprint match was found between an old permit form signed by Daniel Arthur in 1995 and the parole records of Arthur Davies in Oklahoma. They were the same man. It had just been hidden in plain sight by a simple switch of names, something anyone could do in the pre-digital age. And more importantly, Mr. Daniel's happy hour had passed through more than just Arkansas. It had stopped in Louisiana, Oklahoma, even parts of Colorado. Every stop marked by missing child reports. Young girls gone without a trace, barely mentioned in local papers before being forgotten. The connection was sickening. Michael sat in his apartment for a long time after the agent told him, the pieces clicking together like teeth in a rusted trap. Hannah hadn't been alone. Arthur had done this before. Maybe after. Maybe always. The photo in the snow, the bracelet, the symbol in the ash, they were messages. Not just of survival, but of escape. Hannah had escaped him. Maybe not physically. Maybe not entirely, but mentally. Emotionally, she had found a way to defy him, to find her voice again. And now, she was using that voice in the only way she could, by leaving clues. Michael went public with the story. He gave his first interview in April, sitting down with a journalist from a national investigative podcast. He didn't care about the attention. He cared about the reach. He wanted the story to be heard. He wanted it to reach whoever Hannah had become, wherever she was hiding. He wanted her to know she wasn't invisible anymore, that people were watching, that her nightmare had been exposed. And the podcast worked. Within weeks of its release, new tips began pouring in. Sightings, rumors, names, but none led to Hannah. What they did lead to, however, was another breakthrough. A woman in northern Wyoming had recognized the man's face from the old puppet show flyer posted on the podcast's website. She had seen him years ago, in 2007. He had been working under a false name at a campground, fixing plumbing and sleeping in an old trailer out back. He had vanished one night without warning, left behind nothing but clothes, tools, and a weathered book of poems with the name D. Arthur scratched on the inside cover. FBI agents tracked down the trailer, which had since been moved to a junkyard, in a locked toolbox beneath the frame. They found cassette tapes, dozens of them. Some were blank. Some had names written on them in childlike handwriting. All were recordings of girls talking, singing, crying, and humming. Among them was one labeled H, 3rd year. The tape was analyzed, digitized, confirmed the voice belonged to Hannah Miller. Michael listened to the recording alone in a soundproof room at the FBI field office in Little Rock. The agents offered to play it for him later when he was ready, but he refused to wait. He needed to hear it now, needed to know. The tape opened with static, then the mechanical click of an old recorder's button. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Then came the sound of breathing, soft, shaky, a child's breathing. And then, finally, a voice. "My name is Hannah Miller. I am 11 years old. Today is October 23rd, I think." Her voice trembled, but was clear. Michael felt his hands tighten on the arms of the chair, his breath frozen in his lungs. She continued, "Mr. Arthur said I could use the recorder if I promised to be good. So I'm being good. I'm saying my name like he said." There was a long pause. "I don't know where my sisters are today. They were gone when I woke up. He said they were being retested. I don't know what that means." Michael closed his eyes. Tears stung behind his lids. But he didn't let them fall. He had to hear this, had to carry it with her. The tape went on. She described the room, small, cold, with no windows. She mentioned the song again, how he hummed it while working, while cooking, while pacing outside her door. She talked about counting days, scratching marks into the wall until he made her stop. She talked about dreaming of the sky, the feeling of running barefoot through tall grass, the sound of her brother's laughter. The recording continued, a fragile testament to a child's resilience against unimaginable darkness. It was a story of survival, of a fragmented memory, and of a hope that, even in the deepest despair, refused to die.